I didn't register because I was a little up in the air.
Yeah. Are you going somewhere? Or are you home?
I think we are going to be home.
Yeah, that's kind of nice.
I know. We've traveled every weekend for soccer
Yes.
recently.
So you need to be home.
So we wanted to be home. I just wasn't sure about my mom and my sister.
Oh yeah. Yeah. How is your mom?
Her vision keeps getting worse.
Yeah.
The dog is dying. Her companion, and I was a little worried that it would even happen this week.
Oh.
It
Karen.
will happen, and then I think that may be an opportunity to get us to Dialogic. My next
Oh.
project.
Oh.
So I think that would really help.
That could be exciting on many fronts.
Yeah, I gotta figure all that out. But so, as far as I know, as of today, everything's will stay put. But yeah, I can't run the turkey trot once. And my son has asthma too, so he smokes soup out there. So.
Yeah. So.
All right, we'll get us started. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for joining us for Pediatric Grand Rounds. Please don't forget to complete an evaluation form and leave that on the table at the end of our Grand Rounds. I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Kim Hale as our speaker today. She earned her master's degree in school psychology from Radford University and worked for many years as a school psychologist in Virginia. She went on to earn her Ph.D. in human development from Virginia Tech and joined the faculty at ETSU in 2008. She is currently Interim Associate Dean for the Clemmer College of Education here at ETSU. She is also Associate Dean of Assessment and Accreditation and Director of the Center of Excellence for Early Childhood Learning and Development at the Clemmer College of Education. During her time here at ETSU, she has worked collaboratively with pediatricians and pediatric providers in the region, as well as with schools. She is the director of our Reach Out and Read program at ETSU Pediatrics. She has also worked closely with the Children's Hospital and on several grant projects to develop innovative approaches to engaging young children and families in activities that will support their early language and literacy development. So we are just thrilled to have her here to talk with us today. And join me in welcoming Dr. Hale.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here, and it smells much better in here than it does outside. Lunch smells great. We have several, well, first of all, here's my disclosure statement. This was quite an experience for me. I've not had to put a disclosure statement in before, but there it is. I'm doing this as a volunteer and wanting to help you to understand how you can promote language and literacy in a health clinic in a pediatric setting. So our objectives today is, there are several. I want you to get a grasp on the cognitive components of language and early literacy development. I want to give you some description about how that plays into a child's later reading success and school success. And then I have a little bit of a role play at the end. I have some strategies I want to tell you about that you can use in working with parents, things that you could do in the exam room to model for them ways that they can engage children with a book, different from reading every word on the page and beginning at page 1 and going all the way to the end. How many of you are planning to work with families who are struggling financially? Yes. And so one of the things you're going to find out is that they don't have time for books. They many times don't have money for books. And most importantly, they don't feel empowered to use books. And so although they may, in Tennessee, receive books from the Dolly Parton Imagination Library, that doesn't mean that they use them. And so I've continued to tell Dr. Sitskina and Dr. Jay Shanker that you have an incredible platform to talk with parents and to make a difference in how they view their skills and their abilities to enhance the language and literacy of their children. It's just most of the time we don't tell pediatricians to think in that way. So I'm hoping after today you have a better sense of that and feel more comfortable with things that you can do. So I'm going to give you a lot of background information. In the College of Education, I've really been pushing that we base a lot of what we do in research and evidence-based practice, as well as theory. And so I've pulled a lot of this from the courses that I teach in language and literacy at the master's and the doctoral level. In 2000, Congress put together, actually it was before that, Congress asked researchers, what do we know works with teaching children how to read? And so a national reading panel report came out in 2000, and it said for kids in school, these are the 5 things that are really important when you're teaching reading. How many of you remember learning to read? Do you remember learning to read? Do you remember if you were a person who recognized words, a sight word vocabulary, or were you a person who sounded out words? Or did you do both? Can you remember that? So in the world of reading, there's been lots of debates for a long time about how children learn to read. So this was a very important study. I just want to highlight what they mean. Phonemic awareness has to do with the awareness of sounds, the awareness of phonemes. It's very important for children to be able to hear and distinguish sounds and understand those differences before we get into the phonics piece, which is relating the sound to the symbol of a letter. So have you ever wondered why we engage in nursery rhymes and tongue twisters and wordplay? That's why. The more you can do that, the more children can distinguish sounds, and they can understand that bat, cat, hat, and pat all sound similar. And then when you start teaching them letters associated with sounds, they learn that you can change the symbol, and that changes the sound. But the hearing part is a prerequisite to the understanding the symbol-sound relationship. Fluency is the ability to read accurately and quickly with expression. Vocabulary is just knowing words, understanding the meaning of words. And we're going to really focus on that today because that's an area where I think you can make a big difference. And reading comprehension is our goal. We want everyone to be able to understand what they read. So there's a lot more that goes into reading than what we often give credit for. Several of you are going to, as doctors, you're going to have families come to you and say, my child can't read. My child's having trouble in school. And that could mean trouble in any of these areas. So this is the cognitive model of reading, and you can see all of the things that go into reading comprehension. I've highlighted the things that we've talked about today, and I really want you to look at this area. There's so much that a family influences as far as understanding vocabulary, the experiences that children have, and even the structure of the language and grammar that they use. And I know you're seeing that in practice. All of that leads into their comprehension of language and then reading. The reason I became so passionate about this, I was working in Roanoke, Virginia, and I had children who came to school not exposed to very much at all. I could teach them, or we could teach them to read as far as word calling. I could teach them to sound out words. They could read a paragraph. But when they got into 3rd and 4th grade, being able to understand what they read was difficult. And it stemmed back to the fact that they had not heard a lot of words. They hadn't been to a lot of places. And just because they could sound out a word did not mean that they understood what it meant. So when they go to take a 3rd grade test on reading, they didn't perform very well. It had nothing to do with their ability to read the word on the page. It had a whole lot more to do with the vocabulary, language comprehension, and reading comprehension. Also, they weren't very fluent readers because they struggled to sound out words that they had never seen or heard before. And so they often were not able to get through a reading passage as quickly as they needed to in order to answer questions. So what role can you play in promoting reading at home? I hope to give you several. There are lots of things that I could focus on today. I could teach you to pay attention to how children hold a book, to know if it's right side up and if it goes from front to back, if they know how to flip the pages, if they understand that there are pictures on the page or if there are words on the page, because print concepts, that's what that is, environmental print and print concepts. That's very important to learning to read. And you can tell if a child's been exposed to books by the way that they hold and treat a book. That may be something that you do in the clinic when you're a reach out and read person. I hope that you will be. And you hand that book to a child. You can analyze that. You know, we could talk about all the games you can play and the rhymes and the tongue twisters. But I really think what will be empowering for you and empowering for parents will be looking at what you can do to help with the vocabulary piece. And honestly, that's the part that we need, and when I say we, I mean in education, that we need the most help with. So learning to read versus reading to understand, that's two different sets of skills. In kindergarten through second grade, up to third, I don't know, our curriculum keeps getting more and more advanced. We are teaching children to read. Once they hit third grade, we're expecting them to read to understand. So you may see that a child struggles a bit starting in third or fourth grade for that reason. And sometimes parents are alarmed because their feelings in first and second grade were that their children were doing okay. You may have a child who's a word caller, which is what I just described, a child who understands how to sound out a word and understands the sound-symbol relationship, but really they do not have a grasp on the meaning. Fourth grade slump, that's very much when children are not able to comprehend and they move into having to read social studies and science on their own, and math becomes word problems. And so you get into this academic slump in fourth grade. A lot of it will go back to vocabulary issues. The thing that I found out in Roanoke is very related to this quote by Susan Newman. I could work really hard, my teachers could work very hard, and we could teach children to read, but I could not stuff enough information into their brains at the age of 9 to get them to the point of comprehending everything that they needed to. So we have to start earlier. And honestly, that's why I left public education and decided to pursue a Ph.D. and work in a university setting, was to find a way to do that. So where does language and vocabulary development begin? In utero. Talking is so incredibly important. Interaction is so incredibly important. You know, language is a social activity. We generate language. It's infinite in what you can create with language. We know that there's a relationship between the quality of adult-child interactions and then the quality of vocabulary that a child has. We know that children learn to label objects, actions, and characters when adults label actions, objects, and characters. And we know that children become more verbal when adults use words and define words and talk about words in different contexts. So if you are reading a book or sharing a book with a child, and maybe there's an orange or an apple in the book, and then you were in the grocery store later and there's an orange or an apple, that's very important cognitively for them to make the connection. That's decontextualized language. So those things are important. How many of you see moms who are depressed? And do moms who are depressed, do they talk a whole lot? Do they have a lot of energy for interaction with their children? No, it's one of my top concerns, especially for families who live in poverty and they have so many other struggles. The lack of interaction and the lack of language in the home is putting their child at risk for reading problems, significant reading and writing problems. We know that children who are behind in third grade usually stay behind. As hard as we try to catch them up, it's just very difficult. There's one famous study that we talk about all the time. I would love to be able to replicate it. Hart and Risley in Kansas, they had 42 families. They started with families who had a 7-month-old child. For 2.5 years, they went into the home for an hour a month with a recorder and recorded the language in the home. And they analyzed this data after 2.5 years and categorized the language by nouns, verbs, adjectives, conversational turns. They looked at the number of words spoke per hour. They had purposely chosen families from 3 different SES levels: welfare, working class, and professional families. And if you look at that chart that I have on the screen, you can see there is a drastic difference between the words said, the quality and the quantity, across those homes. So if you take that and project where these children would be in kindergarten and how many words they will have heard, the children from welfare were projected to only have heard 13 million, where the children from working class would have heard 45 million. So that's a huge gap. So as a kindergarten teacher, I have children coming to my class that have very different levels of exposure. I'm telling you this because I want you to think about the parents with whom you work and how much language do you think goes on in the home and how many different words do they use. It's not just the number of words, it's the quality of words. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. We know that vocabulary development happens in different ways. There are limited words, just the conjunctions, things that help us link things together in transition. And then there are infinite words, nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, that provide new meanings, that can change a story ending. The details are important for visualization, much more rich and textured language. So ideally, when children start to read, as a teacher, it would be my hope that they have an understanding of what those words mean, that they have an experience with an apple orchard, or at the mall, or Chick-fil-A, or even at the doctor's office. But we know that doesn't happen naturally. Children learn the words that they're exposed to. That means exposed to in social interaction as well as in experience. So the depth and breadth of vocabulary has to be taught. And one of the things that we do in the College of Education is to train our teachers to think about the words they use. Here's an example. My hope is that you would go into an ETSU teacher graduate's classroom and hear them saying things like, please create a linear formation. And for those of you in the bottom quartile, you may exit the room and turn to your left. How many of you would like to go to the latrine? Anyone need to go to the loo? How about the lavatory? So not just using bathroom, not just using restroom, not just saying line up, using very different, rich words so that children understand what those mean. Was that your experience in school? No, not so much, right? Can you see how that would be important for children who are not exposed to a lot of different words? School would really open up a whole new world to them. So following the National Reading Panel, which focused on kindergarten and higher, Congress and the National Council on Family Literacy asked for researchers to look at evidence-based practice, studies looking for at children birth to 5. What kinds of things do we know work in helping them learn language and these early literacy skills? because our goal is not just to help the teachers starting in kindergarten, but really we need to help the parents and the caregivers, the Head Start teachers, when children are much younger, when the vocabulary is developing. So basically we wanted to know what skills and abilities of young children can we work with that will be related to and even predict their later success in school. And that was the #1 question on that report. And the finding found a moderate correlation. There was some struggle methodologically to find studies, birth to 5, that they really felt they could put confidence in the results. But they found that these 5 things for children birth to 5 make a difference in their reading and writing later on. And I've highlighted #4, oral language and vocabulary knowledge, because I want you to realize that this is not just my opinion, even though it was my opinion back when I was a school psychologist and I changed my career path, but research is really showing that this is an important thing for us to do for children, especially birth to 5. So they went further to look at the research and identify practices that we can do in those settings that we can engage in to actually enhance these skills. And again, I've highlighted 2 that I think will be very important for you that you could carry into your practice: the shared book reading and the language enhancement. And I've already given you a couple examples of the language enhancement, but let's talk about shared book reading. How many of you remember someone reading a book to you? Yes? Do you know that there are differing reports because it's self-report from families, and you can't always trust self-report. But we think that only about half of the kids in Tennessee are read to on a daily basis. They spend way more time watching TV and playing video games. Shocker, right? Shared book reading is fantastic because there's a lot of emotional attachment, there's a lot of security, there's a lot of relationship stuff going on. But it's also pretty terrific if you can really learn how to share a book. And I know I've told Dr. Jayshankar and Dr. Sitstina, I try to always use the word share because so many of the families with whom I worked, they did not read. And if I told them, please read a book with your child every day, they did not feel empowered to do so. But if I said share, or if I said look at, and if I could model for them, it empowered them to do something that before they didn't feel that they could. I have several friends who work in the Tennessee Early Intervention System, and I ask, when you go out to homes, are you seeing that families are using the books from the Dolly Parton Imagination Library? And for the most part, they tell me, no. The book is new. Parents don't want it to be torn up. It's a gift. It's something nice. It's put on a shelf. It's not used. But if you, as a pediatrician, have the opportunity to talk about how important it is to share a book or look at a book, and even if you can model how to do that in that little bit of time that you see them, you are empowering them to do something that they have not felt empowered to do before. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, about how do you really share a book. In your memory, when you sat down to look at a book or read a book or share a book with someone, how did that typically go? Start at the front, page 1, read every word on every page, unless it was a really long book and mom or dad or grandma were tired and they tried skipping and you said, wait, you left out something? Read every word on the page till the end? Yeah. And have you ever tried to do that with a 2-year-old? Does that work very well? And so a lot of parents will say, I try to do this, but he or she, they're not interested. So I'm here to tell you that sharing and looking at a book doesn't mean starting on page 1 and reading every word on the page and looking at every page with you as the adult reading to the end. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm actually talking about interaction. I'm going to skip through some of these because I want to get to this point. I want you to know that research has shown when you engage in talking about pictures or you engage in talking about a book and not reading the story word for word, research shows that that interaction can accelerate a child's vocabulary knowledge. In fact, Reach Out and Read programs have shown that having a doctor involved and encouraging parents to engage in sharing a book and giving a book to a family consistently makes a difference in what parents believe. It can make a difference in what they do, but it definitely changes their attitude. They know what they can do. They know they should be reading. Now, whether they always do that, you don't know, right? It's like I really shouldn't want that Pal's burger when I leave here and the fries, but you know, I might do it. But if we can empower them and let them know it's something they're capable of and that you, the doctor, feel like they should, there's more likelihood. Research shows they're more likely to listen to you than they are to me, the teacher. There's a lot of judgment when they come to school. Many of them relive their own experiences the moment they walk in. So they're not always receptive. That's not true when they come to you. Always. There could be, but you have a unique platform. So strategies for promoting vocabulary development using books. There's stages of learning a word. I've never seen that word before. I've heard of it. I'm not sure I know what it means. I recognize it in context and it has something to do with, and then I know the word. It takes a long time, right? You're in medical school. Are you learning new words? My guess is yes. So what does it take to know a word? It takes a lot for 5-year-olds to learn a word. And they learn approximately 3 words a day. And that's on average. So if you have children who are living with a mom or a caregiver who's not talking a lot because they're depressed or they're engaged in so many other things, maybe they're working 3 jobs and the child is shuffled from here to here to here, and there's not a lot of intentional interaction, are you going to get 3 new words a day? And I don't just mean those limited words. I'm talking about the words that are quality. The words, that the adverbs and the adjectives, the things that can add detail and can change a story or change a conversation. We don't know what it takes to get from stage 1 to stage 4 with kids, but we do know that there are words that kids learn faster than others. And those are concrete words, nouns, and frequently heard words. And that's why I encourage all of our teacher candidates to use a variety of words in the classroom. Because the more we can expose them to, the faster that vocabulary is going to grow. And we need it to grow. Exposure is huge. How many of you see families who really don't know much more than what's right around them? In Roanoke, my kids lived maybe on 2 blocks. They hadn't been to the ocean. They'd never stayed in a hotel. Lots of the tests that I gave, standardized tests, asked children to interpret something. Like there was one, it was a story that a little girl was telling. It was on a CD about, I get up on Sunday morning and I make breakfast and I go outside and I get it and I put mom's section on her side of the table and dad's section on his. And they come downstairs and they're so excited that I've made breakfast, and they sit down and they are very excited and they read. And the very first comprehension question is, what did the little girl get off the porch? Newspaper. So in inner city Roanoke, where I worked, my children did not receive the newspaper at their home. Did they get that question right? They had no idea. Did that mean they were less capable than the other children in the classroom? No, but because of the way we assess children, they seemed less capable. There were also lots of questions about farms and farm animals and roosters, and do roosters sit on nests? And my children hadn't been to a farm. Really, their life consisted of 2 blocks in the city of Roanoke in southwestern Virginia. So the more exposure they have, the better. That's a really hard thing to do. Financially, it's tough. Also elaborating on exposures, just like the example I gave you before of if you're reading about apples and oranges and you go to the grocery store, that's a great time to talk about apples and oranges. It's great to define a word. It's great to use the word. It's great for words that you talk about in the morning to pop up later again in the evening or the next day or on the weekend or at grandma's house. That's how children learn. When teachers send home vocabulary lists for families, the hope is that families will use those words at home in a different way, in a different context. Now, whether that happens or not, we don't know, but we know if they do, it helps. We know that being an intentional reader with kids is very important. One of the things that Emma's going to pass out some books in a little bit, and we're going to do a role play. One of the things you're going to quickly recognize about me is that I prefer stories. So I have like Pinkalicious and, Fanny and the Hats. But I'm a mom of a young man, and his favorite book to read was How Things Work. And I can remember saying, oh, come on, Andrew, let's read something else. Mommy doesn't like this kind of book. I want to read a story. So I learned quickly that I have a personal bias, that the books I pick out are pretty. It's usually a feel-good story. Lots of times it's a female character. So I try to teach teacher candidates that in their classroom, they have to have a variety. I'm hoping that when you become a Reach Out and Read provider and you're getting books, that you're providing a variety. Because reading for information, reading text that talks about facts and animals instead of fiction and fairy tales is just as important. And we are focusing on that more and more in the K-12 area. Here's an example of a book, one of my favorites. In this book, The Bear Snores On, you can see that he's hibernating and he's in his den. But throughout the book, the words between den, cave, and lair change, interchangeable, so that children learn different words. So I try to teach my teacher candidates to be intentional about the books they pick out having a different quality of language on the inside. I want you to be able to do that as well. How many of you are parents in here? Have you thought about this before? Are you thinking about the books you have at home? So Christmas is coming up. You need to pay more attention, be intentional, buy things that have quality words in them. I have a list of specific books in an article, and if you're interested in that, there are actually specific books that have, just like The Bear Snores On, specific vocabulary growth intended within them, embedded. I'd be glad to send that to you for your own library or for your Reach Out and Read library. But the most important thing I want to teach you today is about dialogic reading. And this is the research-based practice that has actually been shown to increase vocabulary skills of young children. Starting at the age of 2 and really going up to about the age of 4, we've been able to show that when parents or caregivers or teachers engage in this practice, it helps their vocabulary grow faster than children who are not engaged in this. And it's something that we teach our early childhood majors and our pre-K3 licensure teachers to do all the time. It's not a natural thing to do, so pay attention. Just remember car, because that's going to help you. So this was, I guess it was discovered, it was, the term was coined, the practice was highlighted, and then there was research by Grover Whitehurst, who then became the leader of the IES, the Institutional Sciences of Education, where we get a lot of our federal, it's like your NIH. We get a lot of our federal funding from IES. The goal is to make a child an active participant. So this idea of reading from page 1 to the end is not an active participant episode with a child. When teachers and parents learn to do this, their goal is for the child to talk more than they are talking. Does that violate everything that you think of when you think about reading a bedtime story? But that's the goal. So it's not a come here, sit down, be quiet, and don't move until I get to the last page, which is a lot of what your parents are going to be thinking that reading a book means, right? So it's really great to be able to model some of this. So CAR stands for comment. The A in CAR stands for ask questions, and the questions need to be open-ended questions, not factual, not just one answer, like, what's that? No. More open-ended, because remember, your goal is for the child to talk more than you are. And then you have to respond and wait, and wait, and wait. So in this research-based strategy, you have to remember that the goal is not for you to talk. Adults have a very hard time not talking, especially if you're thinking, well, I have to read this book. Uh-oh, what did I do? Okay, so when you're commenting, you're watching a child look at a book. You're watching them look at a picture. Even a 2-year-old can sit and look at a picture, even if it's briefly. And then you make a comment based upon where you think they are gazing. Maybe because you know the child and you know their interest, or maybe just because you know that most kids are going to look at the dinosaur on the page. But you make a comment. Maybe the child is going to repeat your comment. That's fabulous. Maybe if you wait long enough, they will say something else that you're not expecting them to say, especially toddlers that are just learning. If you give them time, they may say more than what you think they're going to. And if you can relate that to your life, to their life, to something outside of the book, to make it decontextualize. So this is a picture from Jump Frog Jump by Robert Kaplan, I think is his name. And most children, when they look at this, they say, fish. You can see that, right? As a parent, you could say, oh, orange. That's an orange fish. And you could see what else that they could talk about, because there's a lot on this page to talk about, right? I mean, even if they're 2, they could say snake, they could talk about the frog. If they're older, they may express like concern about the snake. Maybe they're going to talk about the frog's emotions, and then you can say, do you ever feel scared? Have you felt scared? When have you felt scared? What do you think's happening in this picture? What do you think's going to happen next? I don't have to read the whole book, Jump Frog Jump. I can just make a story out of this whole entire page. Couldn't you? That's what dialogic reading is about. So when you think about parents who come to you and they're not strong readers, they don't have confidence to read, if you can show them, if you can take a book that you're giving them and open it and say, watch this. I'm going to talk with your child about this book. We're going to share a book, or we're going to look at this book. And if you remember CAR and see what happens, and then look at the parent and say, that's all you need to do. Talk about the pictures. Ask good questions. And at a Reach Out and Read practice, you see these parents a lot, and you're giving them books a lot. And so as you see them throughout time and continue to remind them and model, hopefully, and research shows that you do, you make a difference in how often that they read and their attitude towards reading. And their children actually learn more words because they're not engaged in this sit down and be quiet kind of thing. I've already modeled some open-ended questions for you. What do you think is going to happen? What's happening here? What do you see? Tell me about it. Instead of show me the frog, show me the snake, because those are very closed comments and they don't encourage conversation. Can you think of open-ended questions for this picture? Tell me some. Who are those people? How did the turtle get there? What happened to the turtle? How is that turtle feeling? Do you see how much thought you have to put into that instead of saying, show me the net, show me the frog, show me the water, right? So it's a little bit different. It takes a little of thought. But if you think I only have to look at 1 or 2 pages, and I could keep a 2 or 3-year-old engaged long enough for us to discuss net and frog and fear and emotions and being scared and hunting, and there's a forest and there's water. Okay, yes?
Add any point to things such as naming them in terms of just learning the word?
No, I think that's great. That's a great question from Dr. Wood. It is great to label, especially when I told you that labeling is important. But you also need, in order to encourage their vocabulary, for them to own it, they need to be able to express it, not just the receptive piece. So that would be your next step, is getting them to name.
And I try to connect across situations, like say, how many green things do you see on the page? And what do you see that's cold? Or like have them think about what they're seeing to express themselves.
Well, and those are great cognitive questions for you to get an idea of, are they able to discern colors, right? So those are also great strategies for parents to use. And you will find that many parents do that, the ones who are engaged and have a level of knowledge and confidence. But this idea of getting children to talk and make up their own story about a picture is not something that parents do without instruction. The waiting is hard, especially if you're in an exam room and you know you have so many other patients down the hall and you're modeling this and you're going, right? Gotta go, gotta go, gotta go. Okay, so Emma, one of my grad students, has a few books of mine, and I'm gonna have her hand them out. Just go ahead and do that, Emma. And then I'd like for you to just open to a page with your partners at your table and try to think about open-ended questions, because I know if you practice this in here, as awkward as it is, you're going to be more likely to remember it when you're in an exam room with parents.
And what you said about the cognitive piece, I would highlight that, because really in those few minutes you can tell how the child's
lot.
doing. I really don't have to do
Oh
anything
my
more
gosh.
on my exam by knowing they're looking. Oh yeah.
Okay, so remember car. If one of you wants to pretend to be the child. So remember comment. Go back to the...
Do you want me to keep your bag?
Yeah, because they'll just leave them on the table and we will. Thank you, Emma. It's very good. Still.
From my family's in Which one? I think that's cat.
Well, how's the open-ended going? Yes?
Yeah.
Did you master it?
Oh, master.
with paintings, like paints or something.
That doesn't take my
Heard an open-ended question. Yes? Okay, so I have an observation to make. So as a psychologist, you know, I do a lot of observing behavior and analyzing, and I can certify people crazy. That's what I tell my kids. So I think that what I need to tell Dr. Wood and Dr. Skitsina and Dr. J and Dr. Toole is your students need more children's books. Did you hear the laughter? Did you hear the discussion?
We can't stop modeling. We're like, you started talking and we're all still going.
How did it feel? Is it different than what you normally do? Yeah? Is it something that you can envision yourself doing in an exam room when you hand a book to a family?
I think so.
I'm hoping so. I know Dr. J has really integrated the book into her anticipatory guidance, and she is able to analyze a whole lot about the child cognitively, language-wise, where they are developmentally, based upon how they interact with the book. And you can tell a lot about a family, I'm sure, if the sibling is there and how the family responds to a book. But you may also have families that are not comfortable. I know I've volunteered at times to read in the waiting room at ETSU Peds, and there are families who are not comfortable with the whole idea of reading and looking at a book. I've even had parents tell me, no, I really don't want you to share a book with my child. Which, you know, my teacher part says, oh, what? And I've had students, it's been a few years, but I've had students, master's students, that we have worked on dialogic reading strategies and interacting with parents, and I've had them in the waiting room, and they've had to write reflections. And the very first paper I always knew was going to be based on, I had parents who said they didn't want me to look at a book with their child. Like, what? Who says that? Because people who choose to become teachers usually have a very high value of books. And so this idea that there could be a parent who doesn't have a value for that is quite alarming. And they have to learn to overcome and help that parent value literacy. I am really, really grateful to be here today. I've always been so grateful to have worked with Pediatrics at Quillen and ETSU Peds, because I think that you have this tremendous platform to empower parents and families, especially in this very poor region and a place where families really struggle to keep it all together. If you can do this, if you can provide a book, if you can empower them to talk about stories rather than read word for word every page, if you can model for them different words to use, gigantic, huge, not just big, that would do a whole lot to help that child once they get to us in pre-K or kindergarten. And so that's what I hope you take away from today. I hope you can talk about dialogic reading. I hope you feel comfortable enough remembering CAR that you can model it at times. If you have children at home, I expect when they come to kindergarten, I'm going to be able to see that they have outstanding vocabulary skills, because you now have this evidence-based strategy and you know how to build vocabulary, and they will be terrific readers and writers. I think I've included references at the end, but that's pretty much all I have today. Questions? Yes?
Would you comment on, since the onset of the iPhone, and I see the iPhone handed to the 2-year-old and the 3-year-old to keep them busy, and they have all these different things. There's no words, there's no conversation, there's no interest, and the kid is just absorbed in the iPhone. I think that's damaging relationships and all kinds of things.
Well,
Can you
it's
comment on that?
it's certainly not helping with vocabulary growth and not helping with reading. And I've had a real struggle with this whole idea of electronics versus books. But I'm thinking of like a Kindle, reading an ebook versus reading a hard book. That's where I struggle. I personally still like to flip a hard book, but I also have stuff on my tablet because you can travel and take a whole lot more stuff with you with a tablet. I don't have to carry all my books with me. I have students who are in second and third grade that they are more intrigued with the idea of reading on a Kindle and they're less reluctant. And there are things that can be built into an ebook to help them, such as sounding out a word or looking up a word in a dictionary that they don't know. So I can see ways of using that in an instructional setting. But as far as that technology, the scenario that you described, which was giving an electronic device to a child and they're absorbed in it and there's not interaction, that's not something that I would promote. We need more, yes, babysitter. And we need more interaction, we need more language, we need more back and forth. That's directly playing into how children understand and use words in school.
Thank
Yes.
you for a wonderful presentation, and I think that's a great question, and that's something we really struggle with every day. But even in the 6, 7, 8 years that we've been doing Reach Out and Read in our practice, I think I can see a difference. So there are our Reach Out and Read families, or our families who've been established with us since when the baby was little, who'll come in and actually ask for the book. Or if there's a book in the room, the kid would already have it and be looking at it. Or when we hand them a book, the families comment and say, oh, they love a book. And the residents can sort of corroborate on that. Sometimes you go in and they'll only be 15 months old or 18 months old. And the kids, the moms will comment saying, she loves books, he loves books. And there are families that we sometimes start seeing, 3 or 4-year-olds who maybe not had that experience. And you can see a difference. And they do. Recently had a new patient come to me. The father was so fussed. He said, what kind of pediatric office does not show cartoons in the front lobby? And I was like, our kind of pediatric office, let's talk about it. But yes, I think if you start early and if you keep modeling it, I think we can see a difference, is sort of my anecdotal feeling. And I think we've collected information through our read and play surveys, and our families have increasingly be more interactive with their children.
And it's something that, I mean, we talk about this a lot with our teacher candidates as well. We are very quick as a society, teaching as well as pediatrics, to say no screen time or reduce screen time, and you know, really, I'm engaged in a lot of screen time. So maybe the dialogue needs to be more of limiting screen time and ensuring that we do this. Because we've got to find the balance, and that's what's missing. It's not that I think technology is terrible. We use a lot of technology in schools, especially for children with disabilities. It's really enhanced their life, but that's not the only thing we do, and we're not allowing that to replace human interaction and conversation and the use of language with others. And that's what I think we have to educate parents about. Hey, do you realize that when they're on the iPad, that they're not engaging with you? I mean, I have nephews who were at my house this summer. They were 2 and 4, and they threw temper tantrums for their iPad. I mean, and that was, you know, my kids are old, so I didn't have that struggle, but that was, and I have a, you know, my nephew is a pharmacist and his wife is a dentist, so very well educated, but very busy, and travel a lot, you know, from one place to the other, and so that's a way to keep them calm in the car. I get all of that. But I'm hoping that they balance that with the books that I send them every holiday.
And actually, the recent AAP guidelines on screen time reflect that. And
Good.
It says not as much the amount of screen time, but the interaction during the
Yes,
screen
yes,
time is like
yes.
sort of the most vital part of it. And
Yes.
that they really encourage, if you do screen time, make it valuable screen time with
Right.
human interaction.
Right. So sitting down with a Kindle and looking at Jump Frog Jump on the Kindle you know, if you are doing that interaction, that's not different than a book, really. The device is different, but the device tends to keep people from interacting. Isn't that true? As I walk across campus and see my students doing this right next to each other, probably texting one another right next to one another. And so that's the thing I think we have to work on. So, any other questions?
We would love to get that list of books,
Yes, I can
from
do that.
you, and I can have that sent out to everyone.
Yeah, that's terrific. Those would be great gifts for the ETSU peds. It'd be great gifts for your family. It'd be great gifts for friends.
I just thought of something, if any of you want to give the clinic a Christmas present, we would really love books from that list as Christmas presents for the clinic. So we're gonna do a Christmas present drive.
That'd be great. That's a big struggle, is keeping books in the practice for you to give away. But what a joy when you can do that. Any other questions? Thank you so much. Please let me know if you have questions. My email is my last name, Hale, Hale, KD @etsu.edu. But I appreciate you being here, and I've now passed the torch. Go out and develop vocabulary.